Thank you all for joining us. This evening, and look forward particularly this evening to Doris Wong and her presentation to us on the animal evacuation effort that she participated in during the Caldor fire. I've heard lots of good things about it, and I'm anxious to actually hear your presentation, so thank you for coming. A reminder to everybody to sign in on the sign-in sheet. I think she's done.
Oh,
Yes.
okay, yeah.
But thank you all for coming. So first on the agenda is the approval of tonight's agenda, which you have before you or you received online. I sent out to all of our council members and community at large. Any adjustments to tonight's council meeting agenda? Hearing none. All in favor of approving the agenda as stated?
Aye.
Thank you. All opposed? Hearing none. Item 3 is the approval of the April 20th, 22 council meeting minutes. And I think this is where Sandy, is it the council meeting minutes that had the chipping program concern that you raised to me?
Oh, yes, it was. It mentions the chipping program being, the grant being used where it should say the veterans, seniors and low income grant is the one that has been used up.
So we will make that correction. Ken, that is
That's correct.
concurrent with your information, so perfect. So thank you, Sandy, for catching that for us, and we will make that adjustment. So with the amendment to identify that the chipping program for the veterans and seniors has been used up, but the regular chipping program is still open. Do I have approval for the April 20th council meeting minutes?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Perfect. I see John's thumbs up. We sent out our treasurer's report. Any comments on the treasurer's report as sent out with the agenda? All in favor of the treasurer's report?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much. In keeping with the discussion that we had as a council several months ago, we wanted to promote having presentations, and particularly presentations right now on lessons learned from the Caldor fire. So when we have presentations, we are going to not have all of our community reports identified out and gone through as a roll call to allow us to have more time for our presentation during those months. So if there are comments from the council or any of our partners, they will be held in items 9 and 10 on the agenda for comments good of the order, but we will not go through a roll call like we normally do. So I would like now to introduce to all of you Doris Wong, who is a member of the Amateur Radio Club here locally and participated and did some really cool stuff as a member of the animal rescue effort during the Caldor fire. And she has a presentation for us this evening that I hope you will all find informative. So Doris, would you please?
So thank you everyone for having me present today. I feel really honored to be able to talk to you about my experiences with the Caldor fire, specifically as it relates to animal rescue. So the presentation is up on the screen. Hopefully you can see that on Zoom. Let's go to the next slide.
There we go.
Okay, so just a little bit about myself. Who am I? Who's Doris? I am a licensed amateur radio operator. We are also known as ham radio operators. And I have a license from the FCC. I've been licensed since 2000. Now, as part of amateur radio, there's different aspects to amateur radio. And so I am a part of a local club, the El Dorado Amateur Radio Club. And I am also a member of ARIES, which is the portion of ham radio where you have licensed volunteers who help with emergency communication during disaster events. And so my call sign, my identifier when I'm online, I go by K0BEE, also known as AG1RL in some circles. And the reason why ARES is called into service, the HAM who help with emergency communications, we partner with federal, state, and local government. They call upon us to help in some aspect of the disaster event. So in this case, we were asked to help with animal control officers who are helping with rescue calls to evacuate animals or do animal welfare checks. And so we're activated in that capacity. So let's go to the next slide. So just a quick disclaimer. So what you're going to hear from me today are my personal experiences, views, and opinions, which could be shared by some of the local agencies. But during the event of a disaster, please rely on the guidance that you receive from your local channels on what to do, how to respond. Let's go to the next slide. So presentation topics that I'm going to talk about tonight, I'm going to share the Caldor fire experience directly and some stories, lessons learned. And then I'll dive into some proactive tips on what you could do for animal preparedness in the event of a disaster. And then time permitting, we'll have some questions and answers. So let's talk about the Caldor fire specifically. And I just want to give you a sense of the timeline. The Caldor fire broke out in August 14. The red lines that you see is when the evacuation orders began to residents. The darker red line is what you see in terms of how long those residents had to stay away from their homes. Almost 3 weeks. That's a long time to be away from your home. A lot of high anxiety situations. Were you to leave with your pets or animals, or did you have to leave them behind? Now, once repopulation begins, and that happens starting on September 4th on a Saturday, even as the community starts to repopulate their homes, animal rescue is not done. Instead of proactive house calls, it turns into more search and rescue distressed animals that might be left behind. So for instance, I was making a lot of hikes through the US National Forest, searching for cattle that had gone missing, and trying to locate them. So animal rescue, if you look at the red lines, we actually spun down the active rescue operations on September 8th. So that gives you a sense of the timelines. Let's move to the next slide. So how is this whole operation set up? There is a command center. And because we're in El Dorado County, the agency in charge is El Dorado Animal Services. Now for animal distressed disaster events, they may partner with other agencies. In this case, North Valley Animal Disaster Group came in and partnered to help with the whole operation was logistics. And where Command Center was set up, it was at Union Mine High School. And so that's where we had the whole operation staged out of that location. And so who is involved in this rescue effort? It's going to be animal control officers who came from all over the state, and also local volunteers who had horse trailers or who offered their service, who were trained properly to help with this rescue effort. And also you'll see here, UC Davis VERT. That's UC Davis Veterinary Emergency Rescue Team. And so they will help with any animals who are injured, taking it back to their facilities to see if there's a chance they can save them. If they're smaller animals, they might go to the local animal shelter and be tended to there. So the way the day kicks off when you're going through this rescue operation is that the team of volunteers all gather. You have your local government agencies who are running the show. So we had two sergeants, since this took place over 3 weeks or so, we had two different sergeants come in. One was from LA County, one was from Southern California, still in Mission Viejo, and they were in charge of giving us our orders in morning. So the morning briefings happened at 7:30, and what we would hear in those morning briefings is a fire update in terms of areas where the fire has spread, where it's they're trying to control active fires, put them out, hazards, etc. We would also review safety protocols as we're out there in the field and the things that we need to do to stay safe. For instance, if you're in an active smoldering area, if there's gray ash on the ground, do not step in that because you're likely to fall through and it could be smoldering and you could suffer a burn. So that's like a safety instruction we receive. There is also a specific check-in protocol. So the reason why the HAMs were brought in to help with emergency communications, we were brought in by Frank Yost, the El Dorado County Communications Manager, is that he wanted the ham radio operators to accompany the animal control officers because we are going into areas where there's poor cell coverage. We also have to actively communicate our comings and goings, actively report in what we're doing. If there's uncertainty about the house, we can't find the property, or we're not finding the animals, or if we have questions, the ham radio operators are calling back into dispatch and trying to get information from the team at command, or we might have to try to call the owners as well. So there's a lot of communications that happen. The animal control officers are really busy already trying to do their own rescue efforts. And so having the hams accompany them in their vehicles, or sometimes we might have to follow in our own vehicle, that really helped make sure everyone was staying safe throughout this whole process. So as part of morning briefing, we're also broken into team assignments. I had the honor of being assigned to, I think, six different animal control officers from different parts of the county and parts of the state. And so it was really interesting to hear their take on how they've done rescue operations in their local areas. Let's move on to the next slide. So as part of team assignments, what we get are a set of activity cards. And that activity card tells you the call you have to make. And so I'm just going to orient you to what is on an activity card. It basically gives you the instructions of animals to feed, if you need to feed them or evacuate them, instructions from the owner, and then there's a history of prior calls that were made by the animal control officer. So along the top of that screenshot, you'll see a number in the upper left corner. That tail end of that number shows you, like, for instance, in this screenshot, the number 2. That means 2 prior visits were made by animal control officers to this property. And so you'll see there's notes logged at the bottom of that activity sheet. Along the top, you'll also see that there's a priority given, the number of animals and the type of animals we can expect. Now, I just want to talk a little bit about the priority. I have no insight into how that priority is assigned by the local officials who are trying to manage all the calls that have to be made on a given day. But if I have to guess, it's probably going to prioritize animals that are in imminent danger, or who's or based on chance of survival. So if you have, for instance, an emu who's enclosed outside versus an outdoor cat who can hopefully escape on their own if needed, versus koi in a fish pond, which one are you going to prioritize saving? So this is where all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. And so that's the priority, and that's my thought on how they go through this prioritization process. Now, you're also going to have the address of the property where you're making the call, and you're going to have the caller's information, which we assume is the owner. It includes their address and their phone number. Now, what I found in a lot of the calls we made, as we tried to reach the owner, we could not get a hold of them. And so I was wondering, why is this happening? And so my guess on why this could be happening is that they gave their phone number instead of their mobile number. And if you evacuated your home, we're never going to be able to get in touch with you. We also encountered situations where the voicemail box was full. And so this is something to be mindful of. We speculated maybe the phone wasn't charged, it ran out of battery. Maybe they didn't accept the call because we appeared like an unknown caller. And maybe it was time of day. Since we started our operations early in the morning, sometimes we were making calls to the owners at 8 o'clock, 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning. And so maybe they were preoccupied during those times. We also try to call them if needed when we're on site on their property. But those are some of the reasons why I speculate why it was so difficult for us to get a hold of the phone number that was listed on the activity sheet. Now, with the activity history that we see on the bottom, hopefully we're getting as much detail as we need to understand the conditions that we're stepping into when we make that call. And we need very specific information. For instance, are there gates that we have to go through that require a gate code? So that's something that would be very helpful. What can we expect? Are we being asked to evacuate, or are we being expected to feed animals? So these are as specific as you can get. If you encounter the situation where you have to leave your animals behind, be as specific as possible, and I'll review the tips of what you should convey when you call it in.
And so, again, who are we giving this information to?
You're calling usually in this area, it's gonna be El Dorado County Animal Services.
Thank you.
So let's move on to the next slide, and let's take a look at a few other examples of activity sheets, and I'll give you some of my takeaways, what I took away from those experiences. So might be a little hard for you to see here in the room, but on the left side is an activity call we made, and you can see a lot of text here. We're working with an owner who is highly stressed. Very understandable situation in this, where you're being displaced from your home, you've left your animals behind. But in this case, their voicemail box was full, we couldn't reach them. The owner was clearly upset based on any exchange that we were able to have with them. They called multiple times a day. They didn't want people in the house, yet she had requested, I have 3 cats indoors, I have 3 cats outdoors. So how are we going to manage that unless she gives us a key? So it turns out she did drop off a key, but then she wanted the key back. And so she wanted to meet up with someone because she wanted to feed her own cats. And she managed to sneak behind the blockade, the barriers, and accomplish this in some way. But it just shows you that level of stress and interaction. Now, there is a process that you go through. You're calling you're calling El Dorado County Animal Services. They're the intake. The team on the ground who's being assigned to go out to the property, those instructions should hopefully be relayed to us in the activity sheet that we get before we go to the property, or they might be instructions we receive through dispatch. So there is a process, and so hopefully be patient, be flexible as you go through that process. You might not get the team on the ground right away. So on the right-hand side is another case where we couldn't get into the property. Fish needed to be fed inside a tank, and we just had, the house was locked. We had no way of getting in. In that request, there was also a request to fill the fish tank with water. And so filling a fish tank with water, sure, I went in there, the water levels were low, but to not kill the fish, you have to properly balance the water. And during our calls, we might not have time to do that level of care. We're trying to get to the next call as quickly as possible. So that's just something to be aware of as well. So in this example, it describes the terrain and the type of vehicles that are needed. So this was an evacuation request, 6 sheep and chickens, and they said a small trailer be needed to access. So with some of the animal control officers that I rode with, I'm accompanying them in their vehicles, which are typically 2-wheel drive. These are animal control officers who work in cities normally and not in the countryside. So their clearance for their vehicles is very low. So if you have terrain that's very hard to navigate, we need to know that. What can we expect in terms of where can we turn around? And just kind of work through that process. So in this case, the owner was really appreciative that we made that call. And that's always nice to hear too. Because the team who goes out there, they're highly stressed in terms of trying to make all these calls in the day that's given. Let's move on to the next example. So in this next example, you're going to see Wilbur.
Oh, goodness.
So that was the actual name of the pig. It was called Wilbur.
Wilbur.
And the initial call here was they wanted the pig evacuated. Now, it wasn't possible to evacuate the pig.
With the gun fish. has to be-
So you can see the priority level on this was labeled as a 1. But the animal control officer who first went on the scene for the first call, they weren't able to evacuate. So they were saying to the next team on the next visit, can you evacuate this pig? Now, if you think about it, all these volunteers are coming with their vehicles from their various cities. They're not typically trailers that are equipped to evacuate a pig. You don't know who's going to show up to properly map and plan, okay, do we have enough trailers to do this evacuation? We work with what we have. And so there's no fleet of trailers and trucks that we have, so we work with what we have available. And while we were not able to evacuate this pig, and you can see that the animal control officer that I was with, the pig weighs more than the animal control officer. So how successful are we going to be with an evacuation, even if we did have trailers?
I don't think that's 150 pig.
It looks much bigger. So the takeaway here is that even though you request evacuation, it might not always be possible on the day you request it. It is going to be triaged as priority. Is the pig in imminent danger, or can we try to wait and see and try the next day to evacuate? Okay, so in this next one that you see, you can see the notes at the bottom that someone logged. So as we make calls, we also log our notes at the bottom, and this will be logged in the system for the next visit, so they see our notes. Now, the notes on the bottom here said they got diverted and could not respond. That can also happen. So if there is a high priority that comes up and we have a team in a particular geographical area, they may be diverted by dispatch to say, cancel that call and go here instead. What dispatch will try to do is reassign that call to another team, if that's possible. Or based on the notes we log, and when they take our feedback, log it, they'll see that the call was not made, and they'll try to plan it for the next day. So that's another scenario that can happen. And then on the next slide, we have here a scenario of a citizen who refused to evacuate during the mandatory evacuation order. He chose to stay behind to feed feral cats in the neighborhood. And much to the urging and prompting of his wife, who did leave and evacuate, the wife was trying to convince the rescuers to convince this guy to leave. And so the call here was he wanted food brought into him because he full well knew that if he were to leave and get food on his own, he wouldn't be allowed back in. So the takeaway here is really focus on saving yourself. Don't stay behind when there's a mandatory evacuation, because what's going to happen is if conditions change, and if you're at risk because the fire moves in your area, you're not only putting your own life at risk, but you're putting at risk the lives of the people who need to divert their attentions from tending to the fire, trying to divert them to save you. So also going into those areas where the fire has moved, it requires trained personnel who are hot zone certified who can go into those areas. And that doesn't apply to all the local volunteers who try to help with these rescue efforts. And so moving on to this slide then, if there is a mandatory evacuation order in place, there are usually law enforcement officers, or in this case, National Guard also got called in later on to man the blockades. And to get beyond the barrier, you needed a special pass, and animal control officers can get this special pass that let them through. And they're required to turn this pass back in at the end of the day. So it's very strictly monitored process. So that's what this represents. Now, even if you get behind the blockades, let's go to the next slide. As we're traveling behind the barriers, we also encounter roadblocks ourselves, because there could be hazards, there could be downed trees, there could be roads closed. And so this is what you might see, even if you were behind the barricades. You'd have equipment, personnel trying to clear the hazards, or, you know, if there's a downed tree, they're not gonna focus on clearing the downed tree when they have other hazards that they need to clear as part of fire. So that's just a tip there.
And this might be a reason why we couldn't get to a particular call on a particular day.
Yes, because the conditions as we drive in are not known to us. Some of the roads may be badly rutted, because when I was in the Grizzly Flat area, the roads were really beat up. They were rutted, single lane roads, Pollock Pines, if you're in that area at all, single lane roads, very hazardous, no way to turn around. If there's anything falling across the road, can't get through. When I was hiking the US National Forest, El Dorado Forest, we couldn't even drive past because there were boulders that had blocked the road. And we had to get out on foot in 104-degree temperature, trying to look for this cattle that had gotten loose. So we don't know what to expect until we try to make our way to the property. So the change in conditions could make animal rescue more difficult. We saw many firefighters just exhausted looking. We saw all the firefighting equipment of the water, the helicopters dropping retardant water. And you can see on the right-hand side, we have, and when we were there, we're still in these smoldering areas, not actively burning, but still smoldering, which creates more difficult conditions to get to rescue animals. Let's go to the next slide. And I don't remember what's on the next slide.
There's a deer. Deer on the next slide. Yeah, it's the way to the Zoom.
Oh, okay,
I'm trying to anticipate, so I try to hit it for you ahead of time. But
yeah. So as we were driving around to get to the different house calls that we had to make, we saw a lot of distressed wildlife as well. And so normally you don't feed the wildlife, but they were clearly distressed. They didn't have their normal food sources or water sources. So along the way, we would try to drop food for wildlife and set out water as well. So let's go to the next slide. And so when we actually got to making the house calls could be large or small animals. When I first started this with Caldor, I thought we were more focused on the large animals, but there were a lot of calls that we were assigned to for cats, outdoor cats, fish tanks, iguanas, koi ponds. You just can't really predict what you're getting into. So here, or chickens, a lot of chickens that we had to feed. And so let's go to the next slide, and I'll talk a little bit about the food that's provided. So the activity sheets that we get tell us what animals to expect and whether or not it's an animal welfare check where we have to feed the animals. And so we try to prepare ourselves with the food that's available at command center, at the staging site. And so for sheep, for instance, or for alpacas, there's a lot of hay that we can load. And in some cases, if you are an owner and if your animal is on a special diet that requires special food, this is where the owner has to drop off the food, because we will use whatever food is available and donated. But if there is special food, you'll need to bring that in. Now, we made some visits to properties that had koi ponds, and there was no koi food available on that particular day. We tried to go to a local feed store and they were also out of koi. So the animal control officer said it was fine to feed some cat kibble in the pond. So that's what I mean about being scrappy and working with what you have, but making sure that also that it's safe for the animal. But that's the note about the special food that you might need to bring in if you have a special animal that needs is on a restricted diet of some sort. Now, the other thing about animal welfare checks, this is probably the hardest decision that you have to make as an animal owner, is are you requesting an evacuation or are you requesting that we just check on the animals and feed and care for them? And so don't wait till it's too late. You really need to try to make that decision, because a rescue of a large animal in particular may not be possible if the fire conditions have changed. So that's something to keep in mind. And then the title is a little cut off behind the photo, but during Caldor fire, there was a request to evacuate chickens. And we were told that the limit on the number of chickens we can evacuate was 25. Still very generous amount, but just to let you know that there's a limit to what can be done per property. Per property.
Why would people request just to feed the animals? If fire was coming closer, why would they not want the animals removed?
I think they made the call probably to sense whether or not the fire was close enough, and so they wanted to hold off and wait. One thing to know, and I don't know this side of the operation as much, but once the animal rescue, the proactive animal rescue operations are over, and if the animals were evacuated to a certain evacuation site, after the fire is over, owners have to pick up the animals from the evacuation site on their own. And so that might be something else they thought of, is they don't have a means of transporting the animal themselves. So I think some owners have waited until the last minute to make that call. But really factor in the risk and safety aspects of that.
Doris, I was not paying attention to the chat room, so I wanted a quick before we go on from John S. Are activity cards filled out only in case of a fire evacuation, or can they be filled out in case of, or in advance of each fire season?
No.
So you do it by fire event?
Because you're calling into the animal services who's going to do the intake, it's all dated and logged. Information has to be current if you're providing a mobile number in case of change. So yeah, it's not proactive, plan in advance, drop it off type of thing.
But that's a really interesting point, is it, I mean, I don't know if it's like programs should be updated, you know, like to just get things streamlined as much as possible.
I would say it's, in an ideal scenario, it would be great to streamline it, but in the moment of crisis, you fall back to your basic operating procedure.
And animals change throughout the course of the year, pets come and go, and so trying to keep an activity card up to date, current is a challenge.
Very true. So if you do decide to evacuate, I also visited one of the evacuation sites that was made available through El Dorado County Sheriff John D'Agostini. He opened up his property and he had people staying there if they had tents or trailers and they camped out on their property. And he had a really sweet setup. So he had restrooms, he had showers, he had laundry facilities, and then he also had a whole tent set up if you needed clothing. So that was really sweet. And if you go to the next slide, he also had areas where you have your animals close to you. So we saw a lot of horses, chickens, pigs, goats, just an amazing setup that he had there. So really applaud the sheriff for making that available.
I think that big pig ended up there too.
There were lots of pigs there for sure.
Yeah, there were lots of pigs. Right.
And you can see their common house dog, domesticated dog, was also rescued somehow, and he just burrowed himself into the dirt because it was really hot. Not because of the fire, but because when the fire happened, it was scorching hot at that time. So yeah, lots of pigs. So let's move on to the next slide. So that handles the big animals. So during Caldor Fire, I think they rescued about 18,000 animals. Now, at the shelters, even at the El Dorado County Animal Shelter, they took in 600 small animals. And they felt more prepared this time from lessons learned from the Paradise Fire. So they proactively increased their capacity and
Moved to East Texas by choice in the last decade.
So they took.
I would move to one other.
So let's go ahead to the next slide and let me share with you some tips that you can consider for preparing for animal rescue. Let's move on to this next one. Okay, so proactively plan and prepare yourself. And here's how I like to think about it as a stepwise process. So step one, create checklists. And some of the things that you might want to have on your checklist is program important phone numbers in advance into your phone right now. So you know El Dorado County Animal Services who to call. Because sometimes it might be harder to access the internet than it is to make a phone call from your address book on your mobile phone.
I'm trying to get it back. Zoom is very slow.
Luckily, I printed out that page. I don't know if it's still visible to Zoom and not just.
So it's still actually going out, but because Ed's computer disconnected, we're not seeing it here.
Okay,
Um,
some people consider.
Yes.
okay. Let me just kind of read off what I noted on my sheet then. So as part of your checklist, you might want to program important phone numbers in your phone in advance. Identify where your local shelters are and where your typical boarding facilities that have been for animals through past fires or past disaster incidents. You want to make sure that your animal is properly tagged with a metal tag with your contact information and even microchipped if possible, and then also take photos of your animals in case they need to be identified somehow through photos. And it's a good idea to also scan or photograph any sort of vaccination records for your animals so that you have that handy in case you need to explain the history of what's going on, especially if you're dealing with an animal that has had known problems. This includes vaccination records as well. The last thing animal control officers want to worry about is getting bit by an animal and having to worry about whether or not they need rabies shots or something. So another idea is to prepare a go bag. So we know we're entering fire season right now. Have a bag ready with all your stuff, a kit. And in that kit, definitely include a cell phone charger. You don't want to leave that behind. You want to include any sort of medications, not just for yourself, but your animals if you're taking them with you. Any sort of leashes, harnesses, or tie downs that you need. That's something good to plan for and buy in advance. And if you're taking your animals with you, another idea is to buy no spill bowls. So you don't know where you're going to end up. You're trying to find lodging for yourself. You might need to feed them in the car. So it's good to have no spill bowls available and also a first aid kit. Now the third step you might want to tackle is preparing your home. So you want to make sure you follow all the guidelines on defensible space around your property. And if you anticipate having animals indoors, you want to hide a key. And remember where you hid that key. Because that's the other half of that. Another important tip is that if you have your address on a wooden stake on your property, what's the first thing? What is one of the first things that's going to burn? It's that stake. We won't be able to find your property. So what they suggest is having a metal address sign. And then what's helpful is that if you buy outdoor waters and food troughs, if you have your animals dependent on a water source that is dependent on electricity, and if electricity is down, you want to have a backup plan. The other thing that we found is that as we were going around feeding wildlife or as we were visiting animals on their property, it would be nice if you had bowls or buckets set aside. We saw a lot of deer peering at us when we were on a specific property, and if there was an available bucket, we would fill it, and assuming that they would come in for a drink. So we would also try to use in that capacity. And then any emergency supplies that you need to stock, extra food during this time, that might be a good idea. Now step 4, practice evacuation drills. And you may think you know what to do, and up here, it all makes sense. But in a moment of crisis and when you're panicked and when you're time limited, you might forget what needs to be done. So it's important to drill into your memory what you need to do. So plan and drive your escape routes. Plan your meetup location in case you get separated. Another important tip is to train your animals to load into a trailer or crate because they're going to be skittish. They're going to pick up on your anxiety. So if you do this training, get them used to that, it will make evacuation from the animal officers much easier if you're dealing with a skittish horse or something like that.
So do you just like train, how do you train for that in heightened period?
Yeah, so there's animal training classes that you can take as an owner, and I have that on another slide, but there's classes that you yourself can take. The animal control officers are already trained on what to do. But you
okay.
as an owner can also take these same training classes yourself.
Okay, so you don't just like act really like crazy and try and get them in there?
Right. Yeah, but there's always gonna be a level of stress, anxiety, and panic. And so, like, if you had to load your pickup and you have a lot that you wanna take with you and it includes various size crates and stuff, you might even just wanna practice how you would lay it all out in the back of your truck. Take a picture of it and then set it up that way the next time. That might be a way to ease some of that stress.
I like that.
And then also, keep a half tank in your vehicles at all times during fire season so that you can escape.
We can't afford a full tank now.
Good point. So again, don't leave evacuation to the last minute. You need to decide when the time is right. Hopefully, it's when they issue the mandatory evacuation order and not later. If you do have to leave your animals behind, please do not chain them or tie them down. And please do not set your animals free, because the last thing we need to do is deal with a flock of emu that's running down the road when we're trying to tend to the fire. So let's move on to the next slide. And let's talk about some of the resources that you can rely on, like what I said about training classes. Or actually, before we get there, let's talk about specific instructions that you can give if you need someone to make an animal call, an animal that you left behind. Be specific if you want animal evacuation or if this is a welfare check. If the animals are indoors, make sure we know the key location. Or if you dropped off the key at command center, we'll typically have the key with us when we go out that day for the call. So key location, if it's on the property, any gate lock codes that we might need to know, directions to the property. Now this has happened quite a few times when I was making these calls. You drive your route to the house every day. It's like a no-brainer to you. But what I would encourage you to do is use Google Maps and locate your property and try to drive it from like El Dorado Hills or something. And see if Google Maps instructions are correct. Because sometimes Google Maps the instructions are wrong. If you use Google Maps trying to get there, there's no cell coverage, and then you're kind of left wondering, okay, how do I get there? We also try to carry GPS units to help us get there. And then the Google Maps, they usually identify where the entrance to the property is, and that might also be off. So try to drive your map directions yourself, decide if it's wrong and if you need to provide specific instructions as part of your call in. Now the terrain I've already talked about, describe the terrain if it's difficult, if it's rutted, if you need a 4-wheel drive to get to the property, what the vehicle clearance turnarounds are and things like that. Now, if it's not obvious where the animals are located, please let us know. All the calls that I made to rescue outdoor cats, I was not able to locate that cat ever on all the calls. And we did make a noble attempt to try to find them, but we just couldn't find them. They're in hiding, they're stressed, they have visitors coming on the property. Chances are you're not going to find them all. So if it's not obvious, please tell us where we can find the animal and we'll make the best attempt. Now, also let us know where we can find food and water on the property. For instance, if you have a koi pond, if you already have koi food, let us know where that koi food is and we'll use that food instead. Care and feeding instructions. I didn't realize this, but when we were making calls to check on chickens, I didn't know that if the chicken lays a lot of eggs, and if the eggs are just left there in the nest, they're probably not going to produce any more eggs because the eggs are already there. So you might give an instruction if you have chickens that you want the eggs removed so that the chickens continue to produce when you get back to the property. So something like that, something I didn't know certainly, but that's something to know, you know, in the event of chickens or anything else like that circumstance. Now, special instructions typically will be given that in the activity sheet. Was a key dropped off? Did you drop off special food? Please be very specific about that as well. So let's talk about some resources available. This is just I found through internet searches. So in the first panel, your go-to will probably be El Dorado Animal Services. You can Google El Dorado County, do a Google search on El Dorado County Animal Disaster and also El Dorado County Prepare for Fire. And they have really good evacuation checklists. They have a presentation that was focused on Butte County for wildfires and what to do with animal rescue. It covers some of the same materials that I've described with you here. And then there's also a brochure on how to prepare for fire, which is a great resource. So you don't have to necessarily use their resources, but you'll find internet resources like that. Now, in the second panel, I'm talking here about Neighborhood Radio Watch. And who is familiar with Neighborhood Radio Watch? Okay, great, some of you. So let me just briefly describe what that means. So neighbors can help each other and they can communicate to each other through radios. It's called a GMRS radio. It's not the same as a ham radio and not on the same ham radio bands, but it uses the general mobile radio service. And this is how neighbors can stay connected to each other to alert each other's in the surrounding community of events that are happening. So I was listening to the repeater this weekend and I heard a resident report a three structure fire, like a house, three houses were on fire. She could see the smoke. So she got on the radio and she alerted the community to that. And then it became more of a concern when that fire ignited vegetation. And then there's all this Cal Fire, local fire tried to respond to that. And luckily they were able to put it out. But you're not constantly looking at your phone or scrolling the internet for these alerts. The alert of a fire might not even be visible through an internet search right away. So here you have neighbors kind of informing each other. During that power outage that we had in the winter where we had that horrific snowstorm that kind of cut power to residents in Pollock Pines and Georgetown and all, neighbors were able to help keep each other informed, saying, this road is blocked, it hasn't been plowed by the snow, so you're gonna have to take this route instead. Those are just examples of what you as a community can do to share support with each other. One note of caution is that the Neighborhood Radio Watch is not supervised or monitored by the law enforcement. So this is a very separate thing. So it doesn't replace law enforcement. So don't, while you can hear the guidance of what you're hearing from your neighbors, your official channels of what is happening is going to be through your local agencies. So some of the links that you see here, the Fire Safe Council here has a Radio Watch page. And the club that I belong to, the El Dorado Amateur Radio Club, we help set up the repeaters that make communications possible for the Neighborhood Watch. And so we have instructions there that you can look at, and there's a Facebook group that you can join as well. Now, if you want to learn more about Neighborhood Watch, that is something that we could set up as a separate presentation. Just talk to your Fire Safe Council members if you want, if you're interested in hearing something about that. So you can find those links if you do a Google search, El Dorado County Radio Watch AFFSC. We'll bring you up the links that I displayed here. Now, specifically for animal evacuation training, there are agencies that offer courses like this. If you did a Google search for animal evacuation training near me, that will bring up links such as SCLAR, which is a group that deals with large animal rescue. They offer classes. They respond in the event of a disaster at the request also of local government or local channels. So they don't respond based on citizen requests. It's also a partnership similar to the Aries Ham group that I belong to. And so you'll find links on classes that they're offering. And then North Valley Animal Disaster Group, who partnered with El Dorado County on the Caldor fire. They have a bunch of links to animal rescue teams. And then the ASPCA Pro offers disaster response training to ASPCA professionals, but also to volunteers. So these are resources that you can use. So moving on to the next slide, I really have to say that in driving behind the barricades and seeing all that retardant, and seeing the firefighters, it was just a overwhelming experience. And along the way as we were driving, we saw so many signs where the community was so appreciative, along with law enforcement officers, firefighters, water tenders, choppers, planes, boots on the ground. And this was just really rewarding to see that appreciation as we were making these calls. And so these are some of the faces that I got to know during this whole experience. I loved everyone I met. It's community coming together and trying to work together. Just an amazing experience for me, even though this was an unfortunate event. So that's all I have. If we have time for questions.
So how does one go about becoming a volunteer?
So for me, I was called in because I am a licensed ham radio operator. I'm a member of the amateur radio emergency services. So that is my role as a ham radio operator. Other people who volunteer, aside from the animal control officers who came in locally or across the state, they are trained. But for a local volunteer, like one of the pictures that was in the presentation, there was a local resident who had a horse trailer who volunteered her services, and she's done this before. So she has been trained. She is able to show proof somehow that she was properly trained to respond to events like that. So I would refer to that third panel of training and try to understand the requirements of what it takes for you to help with these rescue efforts.
Both South County to a lesser extent offers training courses, but especially North Valley Animal Disaster, they are big into this, and they have regular training courses throughout the year. A lot of them are face to face, which is a little bit of a problem because they're based in Chico. But it's a great resource, and I didn't even realize that this response during disasters was even a thing for rescuing animals. But North Valley, every time there's a big fire and there's evacuations, North Valley volunteers, they come down with their big trailer and all of their folks to help manage these evacuations and animal welfare checks. It's an amazing organization.
The other thing about what I mentioned with hot zone training is that if you are not hot zone certified, you're going to be limited to the areas where you'll be deployed. So not to where the imminent danger is. But there is also hot zone certification training that you can.
It's like a single course or something that you can take.
Yeah, I think it's an online course, and then I think you have to also go to a fire station that supports certifying you. You may need to prove that you can get in and out of those little structures, like if you're overrun by fire and you have to hide under one of those foil-like blankets, you need to prove that you have the agility to get in and out of that.
Yeah, I think we had just one guy, just Tom was the only one who was certified to go in the hot zone, so he was a more popular person.
Tom was sent in to rescue the eagle specifically, which was near the hot zone where he could actively see flames. And he worked, used to work at CAL FIRE, so he definitely was certified to go into that area.
Brought to your very foundation.
Question, sorry, I just did
I was watching a football game.
for CAL FIRE,
The other half
but
of
is
the
that a
bars
hot zone training? It was the operators.
He decides to
who
say,
did have to do that. We had to go through
"We don't make
to
decisions
where you got in the shelter.
It's
So we
great.
got, is that the same type of training?
Yeah, that sounds like the same type of training, and I think it's training that you have to renew on a yearly basis.
Yes, yeah, it's a yearly, yes, yeah. So
Fire.
even in there to do
I see a
the
Spanish
active
screen.
fire.
Hot by
hearing.
law. I mean, it's the people.
For active fire, so I just didn't know if it was the same.
Here, we all know it's.
Yeah, sounds good. Now, ideally, local volunteers, if you have horse trailer of your own, that's gonna be a plus. Will they send you along with animal control officers if you didn't have another role? I'm not sure. And my role was as a emergency communications person.
Right.
So I'm not sure if you didn't have a trailer, for instance, but you wanted to help in some way, would they send you into the field? I'm not sure.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Any other questions?
course, one of the questions that have come up online, is how would your presentation be available or pieces of it, in particular the checklist?
Yeah.
Seems to be of great interest, so I don't know what your thoughts are.
Well, and I was gonna ask if we could have a copy of the presentation if you would like.
Yes, definitely. I did, on the activity sheets, I redacted the personal information, the identifying information, so I think it should be safe to share.
That would be awesome. So we can post that
Add it to the
information, yeah, onto our website.
Yeah, if you saw your own addresses, let her know.
Yeah, I want photo credit, right?
Any other questions for me before you proceed on with the rest of your meeting?
Anything else on the Zoom? Doris,
No,
this
I
was
think-
wonderful, really informative, fascinating, because you don't think about Hawaii and all of these other things that people have and what we are supposed to do when an emergency strikes and when we can't, go to that, get them all out with us. So it's nice to know that there are groups that go out and do this and the tips that you've provided to us will be forefront in mind, if God forbid we have to go through this again.
Yes,
Definitely, that's not, but
I think it's an absolutely wonderful service that you do, and I thank you for doing it.
Oh,
Yeah,
absolutely. Thank
wonderful.
you very much. Thank you very much for having me. And just one final comment. In the event of a disaster, you want to rely on the guidance that you receive from your local agencies. So while I may be sharing the copy of my presentation, it has a disclaimer in it. Definitely don't take my word for it. Rely on what your local officials are saying.
Thank you.
Thoughtful and
Great.
Very good.
excellent, excellent presentation. I was very insightful on it
Now, Bob has joined us from Ohio.
He's in Ohio.
Yeah, he landed there 5 p.m. our time.
So moving on to the chair and the vice chair's report. I attended the El Dorado County Fire Safety Council meeting this morning. Couple of items that I brought back from that is that we have applied for the CAL FIRE fuel reduction grants that were supposed to be awarded in May. It looks like they have pushed off awards until June. The grants are still working through the process within CAL FIRE, and we will hear whether our grant was approved in June. The second item, and maybe Ken can speak a little bit to this first, is that there is going to be a multi-organization booth or group of booths at the El Dorado County State Fair.
County
Fair. El Dorado County Fair. Ken, do you want to chat about that? And then I can solicit volunteers.
Yeah, absolutely. So just in brief, the El Dorado County Office of Wildfire Preparedness and Resilience was put together a coalition of 6 different organizations, from the County Fire Safe Council, CAL FIRE, Forest Service, the Resource Conservation District, and the both Fire Chiefs Association, Fire Prevention Officers, to basically bought 6 booth space at the fair in the main breezeway, and are collaborating on sort of trying to combine themes. It's sort of the first year to try to do this together. But it was an opportunity to start showing how we are under one umbrella in the county in this space. The County Fire Safe Council obviously will be staffing its booth for almost 4 days, 3.5 days, for Father's Day weekend. And yes, we're soliciting volunteers from across the Associated Fire Safe Councils for folks that are interested in doing that.
So the fair runs from June 16th through June 19th, half day on the 16th, as I understand it, it's a day on the 16th. And then through the end of Father's Day, the 19th. They are looking for volunteers from the fire safe councils to staff one of the booths to hand out material. Material will be all provided. All we need is somebody who is interested in volunteering their time, and particularly on Father's Day. So that's a tough one for folks to volunteer for, because they have events that they're doing for their loved ones at home. So if there is anybody who's willing to volunteer anytime during that 3.5 day period, please let me know and I will coordinate back through Alice and the El Dorado County Parks and Council
We were doing a doodle poll out to the council chairs to make that
to get
easier.
that information. Yeah, so if, just email me and let me know if you're interested.
When
And
does that need to- when do they need to know when the volunteers?
Oh, I think probably just, oh, well, let's see, we've got about a month, so probably over the next several weeks, I think we'll put it together.
it's not like today.
Yeah.
Okay.
But, and I will reach out with, once they reach out again with that information, I'll go out to the community.
Thank you.
Ed, anything from you?
Not, well, I only have with the time card, so I'll get that when we go to time card.
Okay. Moving on to unfinished business. Last month, we put out a contest on evacuations with the for a go bag contest, where the winner who answered our evacuation questions would be eligible to win a go bag. We have a winner. That person is Susan Clark, and I have sent information to her and reached out to her to see how she wants to get her her prize of a go bag from us. We have not as much participation as I would have liked, but the fact that we had any is always a good sign, and I congratulate Susan, and I did send her an email and congratulated her for her success in that contest. Events coming up under unfinished business is the Caldor. I wanted to follow up on the Fuel Break Caldor Fire Field Tour that was held on May 7th. I went on that field tour with Robert Little and his group. We went on SPI property as well as Forest Service property. We saw a variety of fuel treatment processes that folks are using to thin areas and make them more fire resilient and fire resistant. We saw a replanting effort that was held on Sierra Pacific Industries land. We talked quite a bit about how the Caldor fire came up and touched those lands, and how these areas that did have fuel treatment taken on them were more resistant and had less fire effect. In fact, they actually used some of them to stop fire from progressing any further. So it was a really interesting event. Apparently, these tours are held once a year, and so I encourage anybody who wants to go on these. I'll make sure that we put it out publicly so that we can solicit interested people. The District 2 supervisor was there, as well as the Forest Service and a number of other community members. So it was a well worth tour. We came back here, we had a barbecue, had a great time. So just a reminder to everybody that the Smoke Chasers First Responders Fair is this coming weekend at the Amador County Fairground in Plymouth. They're going to have a 2-day event with lots of booths, lots of food, lots of information provided by first responders, and I encourage everybody to attend if you are interested. Information for that can be found on the front facing page of our website, amfsc.org. Moving on to Title III funds, and this we'll spend a little bit of time on this evening. As we've talked about for the last couple of meetings, the El Dorado Fire Safe Council has provided funding to each of the subordinate councils through their Title III funding to do a number of events. Could be community outreach, it could be information outreach. We have chosen to do a couple of green waste days, and the first green waste day that we are scheduling will be on June 11th, and it will be here in or up in Mount Auckham in the Roosters parking lot. There's a good parking lot there where we can manage traffic flow for folks who want to come and take green waste off of their property, bring it to dumpsters that we will have from the waste disposal. We have secured 2 green waste dumpsters for folks to bring their green waste to. We are blessed that Hargos has agreed to come and do some chipping for us to maximize the amount of green waste material that we can put into these dumpsters. The dumpsters will be delivered on June 10th. June 11th will be the green waste event day. El Dorado Waste won't come pick them back up until Monday, so that they will sit there on Sunday, and then Monday, El Dorado will come. Waste disposal will come and pick them up. So I have a number of volunteers that have indicated that they will participate on the Green Waste Day. We will also may need some volunteers on Monday to make sure that we leave the area as clean as we found it, and sweep up and make sure that there's no trash left by. We also, Mike Cook and his group for the Defensible Space Evaluators will be on site. He's going to have a booth where he will provide defensible space material. And he is, we talked tonight, Mike, do you want to talk about what you were reaching out to the businesses that you were talking to?
Well, our evaluators will be there to give out any information needed. We'll sign up anybody that shows up that might want to be evaluated. And then we'll also hopefully have demonstrations of materials of house hardening. So I hope to have a representative of someone there that has demonstration materials of hardy board siding, some of the fireproof vents, some of the gutters with the coverings, examples of house hardening that people can see of house hardening. Just some examples of house hardening, so people have examples of that too. So, and our evaluators will be there to answer any questions that might come up at the time. So
folks can schedule their defensible space evaluation on site.
Exactly. Yeah.
And potentially your evaluators could go at that time, or
Yeah, exactly. We could go out at that time too. Yeah.
so. So we're developing a mailer that will be going out hopefully soon. Thank you, Mike Jeanette, for taking over the mailer for me. I have the front side of the mailer, and this was my effort, not Mike, so it may or may not look like this, but it will. We will have a mailer that indicates we have the Green Waste Day, and that defensible space evaluations will be available. On the back side, we have decided to again do a go bag contest, but it will be based on defensible space questions. And if the homeowner brings their flyer back with the answers on the back, it will be put into a drawing for a go bag contest that will be held on site, and we can get a go bag to them later. So we're working on a flyer that needs to be out probably by the end of this week, because we're about 2.5 weeks out. So we are working on that. There is a changeable, the location is in front of Roosters there, and there is a message sign out there that the PDFA has that I want to make contact with them and see if we can post information on that message sign as well. And then Kim was nice enough to contact Roosters, and they may be participating with coupons or some other offering while we're there for the day. Yes, question?
Will the green waste be accepted in plastic bags?
Not for chipping, no.
not for chipping, but just for.
We want to chip as much of it as possible.
I think in regulation though, for the green waste
Yeah,
bins,
yeah.
it can't have plastic.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and there is, Nakona and I talked earlier about providing a do's and don'ts for green waste drop-off. And I think Logtown had that for theirs as well, and so we want to make sure that we get that information out to folks.
So, well, like maybe if she had like a green waste, like container or something to just get it there and then
Dump it.
dump it in the bin,
Yeah.
even if it couldn't be chipped in.
Right, yeah, so basically what we don't want to see is anything that is going to have any rocks, dirt, trash, gravel, things like that. We can't run that through our machine, it will damage our machine. We won't be able to do that. So those types of things just need to go into the green waste bin and they will be accepted by green waste. But you know, if you do have limbs, if you're limbing up your trees, if you're cutting down brush, even, you know, weeds, obviously weeds don't need to go through the chipper. But things like that, those are easy to get into the chipper, and if you stack them in a way where your large ends are on one end, kind of like the chipping days that you guys, the county provides, the chipping services that the county provides. It's gonna be the same guidelines that way, and then we will also have a track skid loader there too, so if you have large amounts that cannot go through the chipper, we can go ahead and put that into the bin, so.
I mean, ideally, if they bring it to you with the
Yeah.
butts out of the
Oh,
trailer,
that's just, you
they
just
can
get
just
it
take
right
from
in
the
there,
butts
yeah.
out of the trailer right into the
Yeah,
chipper. And the
yes.
largest size of your
We have a
branches are gonna
12-inch
be
chipper.
12-inch chipper, okay.
Yes. Yeah. We'll be bringing the 12-inch chipper.
And then Janet, I believe there also will be, Oklahoma as well as providing a trash dumpster, because it often occurs in these events, trash comes, so.
Yes.
Obviously not advertised, because we're not there to pick up people's trash, but there will be a need to obviously dispose of trash.
Correct, so in case trash does show up, we have a way of managing that. Yes,
Did that trash dumpster, was that an additional fee?
yes.
Because when we did it last year, we were so nervous, there was a whole list of things that we were not putting into the green waste bin, that we just put those right on our flyer. And Blue Falls was one of them, I mean, they were amazing how many things, we just copied it out.
Okay.
But how much was green waste, I mean, the trash bin?
I'd have to go back and look, the green waste dumpsters were 400.
Yeah.
And I can't remember how much the trash was, I
Did
think
you
it
get
was
the
less
same
than that.
size? Did you get the same size trash bin as the green waste bins?
No, I think it was smaller.
Smaller, okay. I just know that we did a cleanup at our property, it was $400 or $500, but we got it pretty big.
Yeah, they specifically said no revolve.
Yeah, right.
So any other comments, questions?
Well, so I don't want to put them on the spot, but I know that Logtown included other partners at their event, and the amateur radio club was one, so I don't know, again, you don't have to say yes or no, but I think based on the presentation tonight, I mean, it's obviously very active in the community, and if they'd be interested in having is there space there? And if there isn't, I understand that too, but I thought there's an idea.
I think there's space in that location, if you are interested in having a booth there to share your information.
Well, we could talk about that offline. I can tell you that our experience in Lockdown was that the booths were pretty far away from where people were dropping off stuff, so there was a little bit of a disconnect there. And we really couldn't be very close to it because it was pretty
Loud.
noisy.
So it might not be the right event. Okay.
So we did have, I think, 4 or 5 people that stopped by our booth. They were real engaged. They definitely were interested. Enough that they made 2 stops, basically. They stopped over there, got most of the stuff that came from people. If we could look at it.
Sure,
Yeah,
definitely if it's not the right idea, then that's okay too.
If you're doing it inside a Roosters.
Yeah, if you're interested, please let me know. Carrying on with Title III funds, the other piece is each of the fire safety councils receive $200 a year in Title III funds annually. We have elected to do and are looking into printing more of these kind of plastic signs that like you'll see up behind Ed and the ones we are interested in is one that says project sponsored by AFFSC, and where we found that might have been helpful is, well, for the chipping event, but also like the school event. It would have been nice to have our a sign up that said that we were sponsoring this project to get the information out that we're in the community and we're doing things that benefit the community. And then we are also looking at sandwich board signage, so smaller signage that can sit outside here for evenings that we have our meetings. We have one at the street, one at the building, or if we're doing other events in other locations, we can use that signage. So Sandy has a contact that she is looking into getting that signage made, and so we will use the Title III funds to pay for the first $200 of that event. Any other questions, comments on Title III funds and the efforts that we're making with the funding that we're receiving? All right. New business this evening. I have no new business to bring up this evening because I wanted to focus on the presentation, which I think was really worth it. So I'm going to move on from new business.
Is there anything I can add to that?
You may.
So we talked a little bit last time about a possible hazardous fuel reduction project behind Roosters and post office. So that whole area, there's about, I don't know, maybe around like 800 feet this way and another couple hundred feet this way until you get to E16. Now I drove by there earlier today, and someone's done some work, so it's better. I think, like 15 people in a weekend could go back 200-300 feet and make that, look nice and get some of the smaller trees out of there and thin some of that out. So I think that would be, a fun weekend and, worth people's time. We had a lot of fun at the school. I know I did, and everybody really worked hard. To me, it was just a really great experience. And I think that, behind Roosters, because there is the post office that a lot of people use, several other buildings there. And I think in a weekend, we could really make it, more fire resilient. And I'm just tentatively thinking like next spring, maybe, because it takes some time to organize. I don't know how many, who the property owners are or any of that. So it's just like an idea at this point. But if that sounds like something that people are interested in, I would definitely put some time into it. I would probably start in about a month or two to start trying to collect property owner information and, who's, if they're, on board with that or not. But I know I'm pretty busy for a good month. But I don't know, does that sound like a collective, what we think?
So all of that property there is privately owned. So
Okay.
none of that is where the school is a government publicly owned property. All of that is privately owned, so you would need to have rights of entry from all of the property owners. You would have to have their various, approvals to do that. We've not yet, I'll say yet, contemplated going on with private individuals. If there's public property, schools, fire departments, those kinds of things, I think they're easier to do I don't know how our insurance, it's a question, I'll have to ask, how does our insurance work if we're going on private property?
Because the other location that I thought would be good is Station 38, but it's really the private property behind Station 38. And I know they had done some work there too, but I don't know where they're at, because that was 3 years ago, and they were like chipping away at it, and Chief Mathis was saying, but they're, you know, they're doing work there, but, so yeah, that's definitely, I mean, I would be, you know, I would get in there and try and gather some information and see when we can try and figure
So let me
that out.
ask I'll ask the insurance question, and let's bring that back up to the next board meeting, when we have a little more information about private property and what we can do on private property.
Okay.
Janet, if that's not an option, what about roadways? We discussed a little bit earlier about how having an evacuation route. What about roadways? I know that Elmo Ranch Road is very overgrown. Is that something that we would be able to take care of, or Elmo Ranch Road? I'm thinking right off Mount Auburn, right off of U16 before Roosters, we get to Roosters. That's a really overgrown area on that roadway. Is that something that
I think
we
that
could
has,
do, or
that has
does
the
it
same
have to
problem
be
in that,
transportation?
those
They go onto the
on private property.
Okay, but if they
Potential
encroach
problem.
onto the public property though, that's.
Yeah.
So the road, the public road easements vary, you know, depending, and so in some cases, they're only 5 feet wide, in some cases they're larger, so that would be a project we would definitely have to coordinate and talk to the Department of Transportation about. But for getting anything beyond where their right of way is, yes, we would have to get right of entry
Okay,
agreements or access agreements to any, you know, the private landowners there.
Okay.
And then it would just be, because it's on a busy roadway, all that would probably require Department of Transportation staff to flag the road.
okay.
And so there's traffic, so I'm not saying any of that's not doable, but there's just a
Right.
lot of
A lot of
logistics.
those things, right?
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Sounds like an interesting project though for some time.
And we've talked about roadways and doing
Yeah.
projects on roadways, so.
Just when I drive into town, I'm thinking, wow, this is really not safe.
Well, and it, you know, a suggestion and for, you know, down the road is to think about, do we certainly could contact we as the council could contact the Department of Transportation and ask, you know, is this in their, they are in the process, they've got a schedule for doing right-of-way clearance, they're getting a grant to do a bunch of it throughout the county, so we could look and see what their time frame is and what areas they're working on and see.
Yeah, it's like the school, that was our first gig, and
It went really well.
yeah, I mean, yeah, I was amazed, like people just like, when we needed someone, like they showed up at the last minute, like Noah and Kai. They just showed up with their chipper at the last minute and were awesome. And George Stan and this guy, and they climbed some trees and took down some really, I mean, it was just really cool like that. All
Still
the
is
people
really
that,
good.
yeah, there's
Oh,
one
they're-
little
they're
tree
gonna
that bugs me,
maintain
but, you know.
Jane and I stay out of voice. Sure. Yeah, so we want that on the agenda next month to chat about. Item 9 is public comment, including partner reports. I am going to call on Ken to see if there's anything from the Eldorado Fire Safe Council that he wants to share.
Just you covered several items already. I'll just add like just a couple more here. I think it was brought up that CAL FIRE partnered with the Fire Safe Council to provide defensible space evaluator training last week. So there were 14 associate fire safe councils and additional folks from the community that were trained. So 73 people received the evaluator training over the course of 2 days last week. And Mike and his team, some of his team members were there getting refreshed. And again, it's the basic Public Resources Code 4291 trainings. There's other kinds of trainings and workshops that get in more depth about kinds of plants and you know, a little more finesse as it relates to that. But this training really gets into that base level. Here's what the law requires, and here are the things, you know, to be looking for from that perspective. So certainly Mike can share, his perspective having gone through that. But I think that's great because it gives us, there's this capacity and a need for having these evaluators, trusted members of the community out there helping community members, not necessarily, they're evaluations to advise on what needs to get done to help. They're not inspections that could potentially lead to, action, legal action if not compliant with. So it's trying to make sure a friendly face comes up and helps somebody get the work done and not feel threatened, however. So anyway,
Mike
yeah.
attended with our folks,
With our evaluators, yes.
and it was good.
Pardon?
Was it good?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. Refreshed and that, it refreshed and there were a few things, there were a few new things that were brought up. So, kind of rattled the brain on things that I'd forgotten and, so, it was helpful.
Excellent.
It's
So-
always helpful to get, you go through it the first time, you remember about 70% of the stuff and go through the second time, it brings a little bit more up. So it helps,
Excellent,
always helps.
thank you.
So what's in the works right now that will impact this is what folks may have heard about it called Zone Zero. It's that first 5 feet outside the house or the perimeter of the home. It's currently with the Board of Forestry and Fire Protection in a rulemaking process because when the law passed last year, it said there needed to be clearance and certain expectations within that 5-foot zone, which is where much of the transfer of fire, either through direct impact or ember, is hitting the house from the ground level and impacting siding and finding it's been discovered to be a significant entry point from the post-fire evaluations and damage assessment. Right now, the way it's written, it looks like it is pretty much zero vegetation, no fences attached to the home. Again, taking a very strict approach because the flammability in that zone is really showing to make a difference. So should be seeing hopefully something coming back out in regulations related to that, but that will change a little bit of all flyers, a lot of the defensible space. Training will have to include what that is and isn't in that zone. So more to come there, but that's kind of been the hot topic in this space for the last year or so. And really a lot of other little things going on, but I think the biggest piece is really where the county's going. We've talked about this before, and in engaging much broader and having more involvement in the county itself, and helping identify and coordinate wildfire preparedness and resilience. So there's an office standing up in the chief administrator's office. It's where the county's defensible space program has now moved to, but it's going to be taking a much broader look at wildfire risk and community resiliency in the county. And it will be bringing in what's being advised by an advisory committee now, including the County Fire Safe Council. But it will be a standing office that will be led at the chief or the deputy chief administrative officer level, and will continue to coordinate really at that 50,000 foot level to try to break down silos in funding, look at the entire county from the Lake Tahoe Basin to the West Slope in terms of what are the highest risks and hazards throughout the county, and then help set priorities, working collaboratively with the agencies and organizations. As more and more grant funding is coming and being made available, trying to find ways to leverage those. Department of Transportation is a perfect example. It's a limited resource. So when we have 30, and yes, pretty soon we have 30 fire safe councils. We just voted in a new one today, Camino. Pollock and Camino separated, and Camino now is its own. The number are growing, and so having 30 fire safe councils, each going to the Department of Transportation, asking for specific project work, is creating, obviously, it's a workload issue. So having the county engage and help facilitate all the partners and help set some of those priorities collaboratively can help leverage some of those scarce resources. The grant many of the grant opportunities are coming with, we want to see more regional efforts. They want to see more local fire safe councils band together to put larger projects. That's really the mode of funding to try to get more work done on the ground at a larger scale. So a lot of changes occurring. The Fire Safe Council at the county level is really trying to staff up, or not, shouldn't say staff up, but really look at its model. Just supporting grant administration right now is a challenge because of the workload. So looking at maybe some temporary help, part-time temporary help to help administer reports, invoicing, et cetera. So it's the growth that's occurring in what's happening. The fire risk in the state, as we know, is elevated, and the response to that is certainly increasing in terms of the availability of grants and the need to get the work done. So we'll be able to report back more over time, but I think the key piece of what I want to talk about today is the county, in partnership with the Resource Conservation District and the Fire Safe Council, was successful in receiving a grant from the State Fire Safe Council for a fire safe coordinator position. And as of last week, the position was filled, and she's on the Zoom tonight, Maya Davis. It's her first week getting out and meeting all the Fire Safe Council folks, and her office is at the Resource Conservation District, but she's also going to be spending time at the county, really working closely with the Office of Resilience. It's one team, one effort in this approach. And I don't mind if you had a word or two you wanted to say. I don't know if we can get audio right now. Ed?
Yeah, she'll have to unmute.
Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah.
We can hear you. You're low, but go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, Ken, you said a lot of great things. I just wanted to say hello, and I really enjoyed the speaker this evening. You guys have a lot of really excellent information out there. And right now, I'm just at a gathering information point. It's good to get to see some faces and connect them with names. And I hope to be seeing more of everybody.
Thank you, Maya.
And Maya, congratulations on your new position, and thank you for joining us this evening.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm very excited about it, and it's a pleasure.
If there's anything you need from us, please don't hesitate to send me a note.
Thank you. Likewise.
So you'll be seeing a lot more of Maya and other folks from the county, and as things kind of ramp up, and she'll be working really hard trying to help bring a lot of different efforts together and different stakeholders. So kind of excited to see what's going on right now. So anyway, lots of other little things, Janet, but I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. In keeping with our condensed partner reports, is there anybody else who wants to report on anything through any of our partner organizations? I don't see anybody from the Sheriff's Office or fire on. Anything, Shyla? Anything of note?
We are rescheduling our Green Wednesday. In June. The other thing is the golf disc tournament. We put that on hold, but Jan and I are going to be going to the golf disc tournament to see what that really entail. So we have a clearer picture, and then from there we'll go back to other months, their calendars, and see if we the combined councils would like to do that.
Yeah, so we're partnering with the other South County Fire Safe Councils to look at a fundraising event and information sharing event after this fall. Thank you for doing that on the top of the other. Council comment, anything from any of the council members that they wish to share this evening? Not seeing a lot of hands up.
The only thing I saw from John Hess about having the our website updated. Yeah. So we get Kim on there.
Yeah, I made a note of it. I did, yeah, I wrote it down, so I have it.
All right, thank you, John, for bringing that up.
And then Janet, just without reading the chat, I think this was a direct message from Mike Cannett, and I think we can probably maybe talk about it offline, but I think it goes back, it's a reminder about the Dean Road partnership with Amador County and Fire Safe Council.
Yes, I've been trying to connect up with them and we're not connecting up on dates, Mike, so I will reach out to them again because I agreed to go and attend the Amador County Fire Safe Council meeting and discuss that area around Dean Road and what we might be doing. And I wanted to share with them the Greenway State that we were doing at that end of our Fire Safe Council area. So yes, I will reach out to them again.
And it sounds like Mike's got some additional documentation you can send.
Perfect, that would be awesome, Mike, thank you. For the good of the order, our next board meeting will be held on June 1st. June 1st, yeah. Very first day of June. Which is the first Wednesday. And our next council meeting will be on June 15th. So here at Pioneer Park again and by Zoom. So if there is anything else for the good of the order? One back here.
Last year, the Elder Fire, we were never mandatory evacuated. But anybody that lives, there's lots of other areas like where we are, where it's one road in, one road out, the majority of the whole community evacuated. But because it was never a mandatory evacuation, people that stayed in hotels, their insurances would have reimbursed them had it been mandatory. How do they determine that the fire was less than 2 miles from us and traveling fast? And how do they determine, in an area like that where if you stay too long, you're never gonna get it? And they don't make it mandatory.
So that is in conjunction between whoever is the lead agency for the fire incident itself, in conjunction with the sheriff's office.
So what they're doing is they're constantly looking at the sheriff's office is responsible for triggering the evacuations and setting whether it's going to be advisory or mandatory. And they're basing those on what the incident commanders, the fire professionals are saying the rates of spread are, what they anticipate based on where it's going, what the weather conditions are, timing, where they think all of that's going to happen. And then the sheriff's office then has to take into consideration how long, with the timing that's being projected, how long it will take to move a community out. So their approach now has been just I think it's a warning, not advisory. Words matter here, and they've changed that a lot over the years. So warning and mandatory. They want people, when there's a warning issued, to start moving out so they can start understand we're reducing the population. But it's just that, it's a warning. There's the potential the fire could be there, but it's not imminent. Mandatory is, yes, based on the conditions, there is a real significant threat. They're just trying to be proactive by using the warning to start moving the community out. And I know, watching it personally here, when they triggered the warning for just everything east of E16, I think it was several nights into the fire, it was very clear most people were leaving during the warning. And by the time the mandatory came to E16, most folks had already vacated almost all of this. But again, those are dynamic. They're making those decisions based on the real-time best information that they can. But they're always going to lean forward and err on the side of caution. Yes, what the insurance companies do, they're not basing those evacuation criteria on what the insurance companies are going to reimburse or not. They're purely looking at it from what do we need to do to get people warned ahead of the fire and then get them out. And unfortunately, the insurance companies are going to make decisions, based on that. And it's unfortunate, and hopefully folks can communicate some things over time that, it's unfortunate because large swaths of the fire were under warning. And the idea is, yes, the fire officials and law enforcement definitely want people to be leaving during a warning. But yes, they're not, the insurance companies that obviously are not recognizing that as an important enough criteria. So there's a bit of a disincentive, I guess, if you will.
Yeah, you know the area of Avondale, and I know there's lots of other roads where it's one way in, one way in, one way out. And you're talking about a fairly large community, and if a fire truck is coming down the road, and no one's getting out. You know, it's scary.
Thank you for that. That is a good point. That's something that as discussions with the insurance commissioner and the insurers, that's probably a conversation that needs to occur.
I think a representative is going to be at the smoke chasers event too. Maybe that's something to be brought up.
That's good.
Yeah. Great. All right, well, I want to thank you all for attending and again, thank you, Doris, for your presentation.
Yeah.
It's really
Yeah, thank you.
good. Absolutely good. Thank you so much. All right, thank you.